Dats. Welcome to the podcast you've been waiting for. Great perspective and exclusive interviews.
It's a hard job for those guys because it's happening fast.
The kind of Saints insight and fun commentary you won't get anywhere else.
We've got plenty of technology to speed things up.
It's time to kick off your Been There, Done That Saints podcast, where we hand it off to our host, Mike Nabors, and Super Bowl winning linebacker, Scott Shanle.
Proud of these guys.
Sean, I really appreciate really all of those words. You know, over our 10 years together, can't say I heard too many words, you know, that were really that kind and that
Leave it to the Saints Hall of Fame press conference for Marques Colston to turn into a stand-up comedian. We're going to touch on Marques Colston and Reggie Bush being your latest Saints Hall of Famers. Welcome to another rendition of your Been There, Done That podcast. I am Mike Nabors. Our voice of reason producer Justin Thomas is here, and I got to bring in partner Scott Shanle. Colston, man, he's grown up quite a bit in front of that mic over the years, huh?
I think Marques he's in the business world now, so there's no more quiet storm in the business world. If you want to get deals done, you have to talk, and I think that's bringing Marques out of his shell. But obviously a huge honor for Marques. Definitely deserved that honor.
And Justin, you know, we had Marques Colston on a previous podcast, and you know, he gave us some great lines. I think the favorite one that we had was the reason he didn't celebrate touchdowns is, you know, he didn't see a doctor when he performed surgery go crazy in the operating room. So, you know, we have a lot of good stuff from Colston and Reggie, don't we, coming up here?
Yeah, no, we do. And it's great to see both of them going into the Ring of Honor. Couldn't have happened to two better players.
Yeah, Scott, let's talk about those guys before we bring in the sound. But, you know, I thought Sean Payton said it was pretty ironic that you induct two guys who were part of that 06 class, which really turned out, you know, I believe 6 players who had 10 or more years in the league, over 70 years experience in that 06 class. But you have the first round pick and Reggie Bush, and then you have the last guy picked and Marques Colston. And you were there in 06 with that draft class. What are your memories of those two guys?
Well, obviously both guys very talented, but on different ends of the spectrum as far as what the expectations were for them coming into the NFL. Reggie probably had the highest expectations of any player I can remember for what he was supposed to do in the NFL. And then you had Marques, who nobody really knew anything about, but you could tell, obviously with Reggie, the athleticism, the just God-given ability, you were excited about him. But it seemed like Marques was one of those guys who every day at practice, you just kept noticing number 12 more and more. Big-bodied receiver, was getting more fluid, getting better at running routes, and just put his head down every single day and worked. And you could start to see his reps increase with the first-team offense. And as a veteran player at the time, I just sat there, remember thinking, this kid has a chance to be really, really good in the NFL. And he was more than really, really good, so consistent throughout his career. But the flashes were there. And you talk about that draft class, they were the cornerstone for turning the Saints organization around. I mean, a lot of people give them credit, but maybe not enough credit for how much they meant to where the Saints are today.
And then you had Rob Ninkovich in there, who I know he was the one that kind of got away, but I mean, he had a productive career. If they would have kept him, it would have further enhanced what that 06 class accomplished. Before we get to, you know, you mentioned Marques Colston. I mean, when you arrived on the scene, it was in training camp, and you weren't in New Orleans when Reggie Bush was drafted. And at the time, it looked like, you know, the Houston Texans were going to draft Reggie Bush, and that, you know, then they wanted Mario Edwards, and then it was a big party in New Orleans, kind of like Zion these days, where, man, we're going to get Reggie Bush. And the Bush jerseys, you know, were printed, and there was a lot of excitement. I want to get your take on this, Scott. Before we hear from Colston and Bush, though, Sean Payton was asked, if the Texans would have drafted Reggie Bush, who would the Saints have drafted? And he said without hesitation, we were going to go with linebacker A.J. Hawk. Now, my first thought, because we host this podcast, if they draft A.J. Hawk and they don't have Reggie Bush, how would that have impacted Scott Shanle?
Oh, I don't know if I would ever gotten traded to New Orleans, honestly, unless it would have been one of the other outside linebacker spots. I assume they would have had Fajita and A.J. Hawk at outside linebacker and maybe still needed a middle linebacker. I'm not sure, but, you know, honestly, A.J. was a good player, but I can't believe Sean would admit that. I mean, after the career, AJ Hawk had a decent career, but I don't think I would admit that was the player you were going to take. With all the other, Vernon Davis was out there, Mario Edwards. I think I would adjust maybe that comment and probably do a little revisionist history, because I'm not sure Saints fans would be too excited about AJ Hawk being the pick there.
Hey, we don't rehearse this a whole lot. Did I surprise you with that?
Yeah, well, I heard that before. I remember sitting in the linebacker room, and Joe Vitt had told our room that, and it was
really?
a big – yeah. So Joe Vitt told us that was the way they were going to probably go if Reggie wasn't there, and
really?
Our room got a chuckle out of it, and Joe Vitt obviously said, thank God that didn't happen.
Can you imagine if A.J. Hawk is the pick – and then the quarterback position, if let's just say Breeze would have gone to Miami, we talked about the impact in our last podcast of all that. But if some guy named Tony Romo would have came along, Breeze is in Miami, Tony Romo is your quarterback, Reggie Bush is in Houston, A.J. Hawk is supposed to be the centerpiece of a Saints defense. It's amazing, though, how the dominoes really fall, right? It's crazy.
It would have been a much different turnout for everyone, I think, involved, because obviously when you have Drew Brees and Reggie Bush, those are the fire starters you need in an organization. I mean, and I don't want to sound like I'm bashing AJ. AJ was a good player, and he played a number of years, but I don't think he ever played to the top 10 pick. I mean, you need to be a perennial Pro Bowler, and never played up to that level. And then Romo, I'm not sure if Parcells would have ever traded Romo, and if he would have traded Romo, I think the Saints would have had to give up a lot for him.
Yeah, it's interesting that, if you're a linebacker, you're picked that high, you almost have to be kind of a future Hall of Famer type Ray Lewis player to have that kind of career. You know how that goes with linebackers picked that high. But let's go back to Reggie Bush. And, we mentioned 06, and it's great to get your perspective on all this. And Reggie Bush, went down memory lane, and he started with, being drafted in 06, such a pivotal point. You know how that was coming off of Katrina. The expectations were not high. And he talked about the impact of being a New Orleans Saint and a part of the draft class and the turnaround back in 06.
I truly believe that everybody that came to this team during that time period was brought here for a purpose to help, bring back hope, help restore hope into the city, to the people, by going out and doing what we do best, playing football, winning football games. And it's amazing, when you have that opportunity to be able to do something like that.
I want to get your take on that, because I'm sure you share those emotions in a big way.
Without a doubt. I think, I've said before, I think we were all a little bit naive as to how much we meant to the city and the region at the time. I mean, we obviously all understood the devastation that everybody went through, being displaced, people moving back home to their homes. For me, it was a reality check once I got there, and you could see drywall stacked up along every road. People were gutting their houses. Restaurants were closed. And obviously for Reggie, the story's been told that he didn't want to go to New Orleans. He wanted to go to New York. He wanted to go to these places with more marketing ability. And I think Reggie, now being more mature, and at the time, looking back, is so grateful and thankful that he could do more than just be a marketing guy and sell things. He was able to bring hope to a city and a region, and that means so much more when it's all said and done. To have that type of impact, I think those are the things you look back and you're grateful for.
We have some unbelievable Reggie Bush stories you have to stick around for. One that just kind of blew my mind at the press conference. But let's hear Sean Payton talk about his favorite Reggie Bush memories, and one of them kind of has a baseball motif every Saints fan can remember, and the great Super Bowl run back in 2009.
I remember him carrying out the baseball bat that was like our secret, and thinking, holy cow, there's going to be questions about that. But an amazingly dynamic player, an amazing teammate, a guy that was obviously a huge part of what we build here just from the very foundation of getting started.
You remember the baseball bat, of course, when it was the NFC Championship game, I believe. What was the locker room like? Did he surprise his teammates, too, with that? Scott Shanle?
Well, I don't know if a few of the guys knew that he was going to do it. I certainly had no idea. And the one thing I do remember is thinking, come on, man, that was our little hidden secret. We called it Bring the Wood game. That was an extra physical game. We were going to have to bring the wood. And Reggie, well, I guess just like Reggie said, he wanted to include the fans in that. He wanted to include the entire Superdome. He wanted to let everyone know that you're a part of this just like us, and we need you on this run just like we need the other all 53 guys and the coaches. So, it ended up being a great thing because to this day people still talk about that, and the bat and the wood games kind of became synonymous with New Orleans Saints, and people have been ripping it off throughout the league. You've seen that over the years. So it was one of those things where I think Reggie meant well by trying to get the fans to realize they're involved in what we're doing outside the Superdome.
I thought this was going to be a slow podcast. It's, right before minicamp and the heart of OTAs, but I'm enjoying this as much as any of them so far. I mean, this is great stuff, just kind of playing off, Sean Payton, Reggie Bush. We're going to have Marques Colston, but this is what this podcast is all about is, getting your perspective combined with the guests that we've had and the sound that we bring in. Let's kind of make that maneuver to Marques Colston. I love what he said in the beginning. Sean Payton kind of waxes poetic on and on about Marques Colston. And then Colston's like, I never heard those words when I was playing. And I guess you see that. I mean, you played for Parcells, you played with Sean Payton. Those guys, you're in the trenches with them in training camp and during games, but you see different guys once you retire, don't you?
Absolutely. I think guys, you see more of their personality, and it's a combination of you see their personality and their maturity when they're done with the game. And I can understand, I can completely relate with Marques. He's a late round pick. I was a late round pick. And you kind of walk around the building at all times thinking, man, I don't want them to cut me for anything besides just not being a good football player. So you're always thinking, I don't want to say anything stupid. I don't want them to think anything. So you just go about your business. And then when you're done, you're like, oh, what the heck? I can be myself. I can say things I wish I would have said to the coaches. And that relationship change I've talked about with Coach Payton before is once you're done as a player, you get to see a different side of him on a consistent basis. But when you're a player, I think that's the one thing that makes that building special is everybody understands who's in charge. That's Sean Payton. You understand when you're there to work, it's a business of winning. You're there to win games. Hey, when you're done and retired, you can kick back, you can joke, you can say the things that Marques said at the ceremony. So it's all good.
You never get comfortable. But I know you were a guy that, had to earn everything in the NFL. Was there a point with the Saints, because you were with the Saints for a long time, you never got comfortable, but did you get more comfortable? I mean, after that 06 season, you had the Super Bowl season. I mean, you had a great run in New Orleans. Can you see kind of a turning point in your Saints career where maybe you got a little more comfortable?
Yeah, I think for me, when I got traded there, I had my head down. I was trying to work for a spot until Joe Vitt pulled me aside one day. He said, hey, listen, we traded for you for a reason. You're the starting weak side linebacker this year. You need to start thinking like that. You're not trying to earn a roster spot. You're trying to become a really good starting linebacker in the NFL. And that changed everything for me. At that point, I went from being a nickel linebacker playing special teams in Dallas to thinking, okay, I have to earn my way. And I was going to my last year of my contract. Fortunately for us, we went to the NFC Championship. I re-signed. And that next year, I probably had one of the worst years of my career because I exhaled. I thought I had arrived. This is what it's like to not have to fight for your spot anymore. And it was after that year where I realized I need to get back to doing what I had done the previous 4 years and just realizing the thing that helped me get there was always having that chip on my shoulder and feeling like I could be cut at any moment. So I kind of did that throughout the rest of my career. No matter how many games I started, no matter where I was on the 53-man roster, I just used that approach because that 2007 year, I just never forgot that moment where I let myself down, let the team down by exhaling too much and getting too comfortable.
I've known you for a long time, and I never heard that story. That's fascinating to me. That's, to me, the things I like to ask athletes because, obviously you're not going to offer that up when you play. And sometimes, you never know from player to player how you feel about that. Well, Marques Colston kind of felt that way immediately before Scott Shanle arrived in New Orleans. Marques Colston was drafted with that splendid 06 class, and he had a horrid minicamp. Did not look comfortable, looked very uncomfortable. But Sean Payton talked about how the flip switched when Marques Colston and the Saints kind of realigned for training camp in Millsaps back in 06.
All of a sudden, this Colston each day just boom, just keeps making pars and birdies, just keep putting practices together where, it goes from, I can remember the first deep in he caught on the grass field that was 60 yards long, and we had the arena ball blow up sidelines in case you went out of bounds. These things caught you. And I remember that first week and then that second week, and at some point into that first month of training camp feeling like, hey, we got our starting split end.
You were there, Scott. Do you remember some of the pars and the birdies from Marques Colston?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great analogy because that was Colston. 10-yard deep in, quick out on the outside, big body, boxing out corners. And it was just so consistent and methodical. And everything that we talked about why he didn't go to a Pro Bowl, it wasn't flashy. It was consistent. And the guys who played with him knew exactly what he was doing. And, he was quiet, but he had a lot of confidence. You could tell by the way he played. He carried himself with his body language and just the way he went about his work. And I think he earned everyone's respect through that. Obviously, you have to make plays, and he definitely did that in early on in his career.
It was funny in the press conference for the Hall of Fame. You were there with Dante Stallworth was the wide receiver and Joe Horn was there, and they were kind of the two big guys at the wide receiver position. And Peyton admitted he and Dante Stallworth are friends these days, but he wanted Dante Stallworth out of town. He was one of the guys he wanted to weed out because, as you know, they weeded out that locker room very quickly. We had, you've talked about it. I thought John Stenchcomb, we had him on an earlier podcast, really gave us a good perspective of how he felt like he had two careers before 06 with Jim Haslett and then, of course, with Sean Payton. But Sean Payton made no bones about Dante Stallworth not being really at the top of his most popular player list. But the reason Dante Stallworth was so easy to get rid of was because Colston played so well, Scott.
Yeah, a lot of coaches don't always mix personality-wise with some of the players in the locker room. But if you have young guys who you can mold, and that's why a lot of teams like to build their teams through the draft, obviously not just salary cap reasons, but you get to mold young guys into showing them exactly what you want from a player. And that's not always easy to do with veteran players who have been established with another coach. And when Marques came in, I'm not sure they had – when you draft a guy that late, especially at the wide receiver position, you're thinking maybe he can give us some reps on special teams. Maybe he'll develop in year 2 or 3, and we'll see what he can turn into. And for Marques to do it as early as he did made that an easy trade. And one of the trades they forget about is they traded Stallworth to Philly, and we brought in Mark Semino, who ended up starting 2 years at middle linebacker before Jonathan Vilma. So it ended up being a great trade, and that was thanks to Marques Colston being productive.
There was a lot of movement on that roster before you got there and even during training camp. Could you kind of feel things gelling? Because the expectations weren't high. You guys didn't play great that preseason. But what was the feeling in that locker room? Because you had guys who were the old guard like Joe Horn and Dante Stallworth. Then, you started to see that Sean Payton may obviously want to make some changes. What was the mood at that time?
Well, the one thing I give those guys a lot of credit, and defensively, or some of the other guys, I've said Deuce had a big role in this. Charles Grant was outstanding. Mike Carney was a holdover. Will Smith was a holdover. The one thing that those guys had not experienced before Sean was a lot of success. So they were very open-minded to new coaches, new philosophy, and not once did I ever hear them getting into little groups and complaining about the way the coaches are doing anything or saying, man, Haslett was much easier training camp, or they never did that. And to their credit, that's a huge part of building something new and having the guys buy in. And they were a huge reason why we were able to gel as fast as we did.
Well, making the segue to former Saints before you got there, it's interesting to me. This is unbelievable, Scott. Reggie Bush is from San Diego. Ricky Williams is from San Diego. Both guys played for the New Orleans Saints. Both guys were Heisman Trophy winners. And Reggie Bush admitted that he had never met Ricky Williams yesterday. How was that possible?
Well, I know they're from the same, they're on the West Coast. They both played for the Saints. But I'm going to tell you, when it comes to personality-wise, just what I know through seeing what Ricky was like and what I know Reggie's like, there's not a whole lot of personality similarities there that I think would get those two in the same room for very long.
That blew my mind. You would figure in an airport, at a football camp, they both do a little media. Reggie does more, but at some point, you thought they would have met. It kind of tells me two things: that Ricky Williams doesn't make his way back to New Orleans too much, and I don't think he kind of leaves his comfort zone that much either, unless he's going overseas and doing, yoga or whatever Ricky does. But speaking of former New Orleans Saints, it's interesting the tie-in that Reggie Bush has with Kyle Turley. Now, Kyle Turley was a big player at San Diego State before he went to the New Orleans Saints. And Reggie Bush kind of tells the story of how he knew Kyle Turley.
When he got drafted, we found out the news that he got drafted number 1 to the Saints. He brought me back a signed Saints hat and a signed Saints T-shirt. And I was probably about 11, 12 years old at this time. And, he didn't know, if I was going to go on to be, play college football or play, at the professional level. And so when I look back on that time, living across the street from Kyle Turley and him bringing me back that signed Saints hat, that signed Saints shirt, to me, it was almost like God's wink, like this is, your future.
I think move over Kevin Bacon. Reggie Bush may be NFL's Kevin Bacon. I mean, he hasn't met Ricky Williams, but to have that kind of relationship with Kyle Turley, they were neighbors growing up when Kyle Turley was in college, and Reggie Bush was a young kid growing up in San Diego, and Turley would bring him back memorabilia from the Saints. That's unbelievable, Shanle.
That's a great story. You love to hear stories like that because I'm the same way Reggie is. I look back, when you're done with your career, you start to look back at those moments and think maybe it was a little divine intervention. Maybe it was a heads up as to what's coming your way. And I think it's really cool that Kyle did that. He didn't have to do that. And who knows, maybe he inspired Reggie on some level to want to become an NFL player, become one of the best college football players ever. So I think it's a great story. And it just goes to show you how you can have a huge impression in kids' lives just by doing those little gestures.
Reggie Bush was a good NFL player. Maybe not, I don't know if you put him in the great category, but you were there when it all started. There were so many expectations with Reggie Bush. I mean, the Gale Sayers comparisons, I just think were expectations too high? I mean, were they so high that it was just almost unreachable for Reggie to some degree?
I think so. I think that's fair. You're talking about Reggie Bush, who all you got to do is go search Twitter, search social media, and say who was the best college football player ever. And a lot of people say Reggie Bush was the most electrifying college football player ever. And so to go from that to expecting that same performance in the NFL, it takes durability, it takes staying healthy, and he played a position that's very hard to do. And his body type was a different body type from what you see out of most running backs. But when you look at his electrifying plays in the NFL, I think there's no way you can say he didn't live up to the expectations. He has still some of the most electrifying plays in the NFL. It was just, he wasn't built to be that consistent Le'Veon Bell 20 to 30 touch type running back. His body type just wasn't built for that. And then obviously, I think maybe the perception of his career would be different if he had spent his whole time in New Orleans instead of jumping around and playing for different teams. I agree, he had a good career, but it was going to be hard to live up to the expectations that were placed upon him.
And I think the Achilles heel for Reggie was running between the tackles, and he'll even admit that USC, the holes were gigantic, and he could really use his talents. It was like a men playing with boys. But in the NFL, I mean, it was an adjustment for Reggie running between the tackles, and I don't think that many thought that it would be that big of an adjustment for him.
Yeah, and the one thing about Reggie is I think he is a running back, and he ran tough. When he ran in between the tackles, he would lower his pads. He would bring it. Now, you wouldn't feel it like when Deuce lowered his pads and brought it because Deuce was a completely different body type, obviously. But Reggie was one of those guys who we've talked a lot about Drew Brees and Sean Payton. We talked a couple weeks ago who deserves more credit, and it was a match made in heaven at the right time. I think Reggie Bush, starting off in New Orleans with Sean Payton, who got creative with him, lined him up running back, put him out at wide receiver, ran bubble screens with him, did all sorts of things. It was a match made in heaven for Reggie as well. And that's why I say it would have been interesting to see what would have happened with his career if he could have stayed 10 years in New Orleans with Sean's offense.
Remember that run he had in the playoffs in 2009 against Arizona? I think that play is what Saints fans were thinking. Now that's what we were waiting for, a play like that.
Yeah, it looked like a video game. The jump back, like somebody was using a joystick on him, and there were moments I remember standing on the sideline and defensive guys just looking at each other with big eyes and shaking their head like, I don't know how he does it, but I'm glad that man's on our team today.
Well, a calling card for Sean Payton is obviously the offense, but it's of him also giving guys chances. I mean, if you look at the Saints Hall of Fame a year ago, it featured two guys we've had on this podcast, undrafted free agents, Lance Moore and Pierre Thomas. A year later, it's a guy who was almost an undrafted free agent, and Marques Colston. And Colston talked at the Hall of Fame press conference about Peyton and the Saints always giving guys opportunities.
What you quickly realize is that the opportunity to come and play at this organization, the one thing that you're going to get is an opportunity to show what you can do. And, I'm obviously, for forever grateful, forever indebted to this organization for getting that opportunity.
Sean Payton will be known for a lot of things when he leaves New Orleans one day. The offensive mind, the risk-taking, but giving guys chances and not playing favorites, I think that'll be a big part of the resume, Scott. And Marques Colston is proof of that.
He definitely is proof of that. And I think anybody who's listened to our podcast, the guys we've had on in the past, and even myself commenting about it consistently is, Coach Payton would always say, I don't care about the most talented 53. I care about the right 53. The guys who play the best together, the guys who I can rely on, who stay healthy, take care of their bodies, do the right things off the field. And that chemistry that he was able to build is what allowed us to have so much success. And the other thing is, as a player, when you go to New Orleans, if I can do all those things, I'm going to have a chance to play here. And it's not like that around the NFL at every stop. There's certain organizations that they don't care how many plays you make. If you're not a 6'2" receiver who runs a 4.4, they're getting rid of you. They all want to pass the look test because that's the way some organizations run themselves. So you got to give Coach Payton a lot of credit. To me, the best story to embody what he's about is the Antonio Pittman, Pierre Thomas, kept the best player when not a lot of teams would do that. So it's a rare thing, but the organizations that do that, they have consistency and they have a winning culture and a winning atmosphere because all the guys in the locker room know, hey, if I make plays, I'll be here.
Yeah, I think Marques Colston definitely set the tone for guys like Lance Moore and Pierre Thomas, and the list goes on and on and on. Well, speaking of going on, Justin, you know what time it is. Like we said, guys, almost a half hour, and it's not even mini camp yet. That's the way the podcast goes when you're bringing up Saints memories. We have great perspective from Scott Shanle. More likely, though, 3 hypotheticals, and I want to start with you, Scott. We'll have Justin give us some feedback as well. We talked about the 06 class. Unbelievable. The bookends, you had Bush and Colston, but you had Roman Harper, you had Jari Evans, you had Rob Ninkovich. I mean, unbelievable hits for the New Orleans Saints front office. But more likely, what's the best rookie class in the Sean Payton era? The 06 class or the 2017 class?
Oh, I'm probably going to be a little bit biased, but I think the 06 class, just like I said, they allowed they were a cornerstone for an organization that needed a cornerstone draft class at that exact moment. And for them to hit and be as productive as they were in Coach Payton's first year, and that year signing Drew, I think it was – there may be some other draft classes that come after them that maybe are more talented. It's going to be tough, but what they meant and what they did for that organization at that time to allow them to be where they are right now in 2019, I would have to go with the 06 draft class.
Justin, 06 or 2017?
It's funny because essentially what I was going to say is exactly what Scott said. I think the 17 draft class is probably the more talented. But it's obvious that the 06 draft class was so pivotal to the turnaround of New Orleans, bringing in all those pieces that played for so long, led to the Super Bowl. If you're asking from a pure talent standpoint, though, I think you have to go with the 2017 draft class, though.
Yeah, I think you look at talent, you have 2017, but impact, you have 06, especially given the circumstances. I mean, that was Sean Payton's first ever year as a head coach. I mean, that front office, when you look back, I mean, that's an unbelievable job. I mean, they're coming off not knowing where they're going to be potentially. I'm sure the families it was a tough situation. For them to put together that coaching staff and have that front office and pick those guys is unbelievable. I mean, you look back, Jari Evans may be the best draft pick in franchise history, just given where he is and what he meant to that offensive line for so long. Of course, you had Reggie Bush, you had Roman Harper, then you have Colston, who's the best receiver in Saints history. But, man, 2017 is so hard to bypass. You get 5 starters with the healthy Alex Anzalone in there. I think it's talent for 2017, more talent, but I think impact is going to be really tough to beat the 2006 class, especially guys who played 10 or more years. Let's see if those 2017 guys can play that long. All right, second more likely. I really want to get Shanley's opinion on this. Kind of a hot button story in the NFL is expanding to 18 games, shortening the preseason. I don't think the players will ever go for this. More likely, do you ever see an 18-game season in the NFL anytime soon, Shanley?
Anytime soon, I would have to say no, but I really think that we will see it. I think eventually we're going to see it, and it all comes down to money. Until what the owners are going to do is they're going to show the players how much more revenue they can make, and the players are going to say, well, we're going to make more money, obviously, because there's more games, but we want a bigger chunk of that. So that's going to be a negotiation tactic come after 2020 season when the new collective bargaining agreement has to be dealt with. But I don't know if it'll happen then, but I think eventually you're going to see 18 games, and I think a lot of this softening of practices and time away from the facility when the season's over is the owners have been coordinating this for years so guys can not use that their bodies are getting beat up, this and that excuse. It doesn't matter. When you play 16 games, your body is hurting by week 14, 15, 16. But if you can tell players you're going to make X amount of dollars more if you play 2 more games, I think eventually it's going to all come down to money.
Yeah, and I think that, to me, I love the preseason because covering in the Sean Payton era, we've seen all the great stories develop, from the Lance Moores, the Pierre Thomases. But I don't think the fans really care about the preseason that much. It's interesting. We had player rep for the Saints, Thomas Morstead, on the podcast, and he says he wants to come on and talk about some of the issues. And obviously that'll be one of them. So we got to get Morstead back on very soon. But, Justin Thomas, what do you think of the 18-game schedule? Are you in favor of it? You think we'll see it soon, or you like it the way it is?
I mean, anyone who's a football fan probably isn't going to argue against having more football games. It's probably not best for players' health. You'll probably see, if they do expand, I could see players playing for less years. But I agree with Shanley. I think it's probably not going to come anytime soon, but I do think it is inevitable. Money, at the end of the day, always wins. And anytime that owners and players could potentially make more money, it's going to be hard for anyone to say no to that.
How about this, Shanley, a compromise? You cut the preseason in half and you have 17 games. What do you think of that?
I think, you know what, Mike, players would jump all over that in a heartbeat. I really believe that because August is so long. And the preseason isn't bad if you're a veteran player because you hardly play. But it's still, you feel like you're waiting to get to the real games. And if you could cut that down to 2 games, because most teams understand who they're having on their 53-man roster. You don't need 4 preseason games to evaluate that. If you went 2 and went to 17 regular season games, I think players would do that. And
maybe more inter-squad scrimmages. I don't know if you guys like those or not during training camp. Those get pretty physical, don't they?
Yeah, my personal opinion, I hated them, honestly. I would much rather be in the confines of our training camp site. And, we get used to going against each other as players, and we kind of start to brother-in-law, you look good, I'll look good. When you go to those intra-squad scrimmages, nobody cares about the other team's safety or health, and all it takes is one guy to go low on somebody. Now you've injured another team's player, and nobody cares but you and your team about your players. So I just never liked them because safety, more because of the safety factor.
I just remember Jeremy Shockey just throwing the haymaker in Houston that one preseason. That just kind of typified to me the inter-squad scrimmages. Okay, we've talked a lot about Sean Payton in this podcast, obviously, but especially since the season has ended. Did he wear the Goodell shirt at the press conference? We know he did. Does he have a fleur-de-lis tattoo? We think he does. But it was all out in the open at the Hall of Fame presser. I don't know if you saw it, Scott, but Sean Payton has shaved his head. Yay or nay, more likely, should Sean Payton keep the do, or does he need to grow his hair back?
You know what? I was taken aback. I didn't even know it was Coach Payton. I saw the picture on Twitter. And I'm like, what? Sean went with the little boy summertime haircut. It's like school's out. I'm going to cut it down for a nice, cool summertime haircut. But I didn't think it looked too bad. I'm not sure if anybody got a reason why he decided to do that after all those years. I think early in his career, you got used to seeing the gel with the spike, and that became his look. I don't know. It'd be interesting to see why he decided at this point to go with the short cut.
Little boy summertime haircuts make the podcast. I like, to me, he should have had that in Millsaps. That would have served him a little better, right? That would have been nice.
Yeah, absolutely. The only difference, he would have definitely had to wear a hat because it was 120 degrees. The UV index was off the charts, not even a scale for it, and no shade anywhere.
Yay or nay on the Sean Payton bald look, Justin?
I was actually hoping you would bring this up. When I saw the presser, I was shocked. It took me a while to get used to it. I think after watching most of the presser, I'm kind of used to it now, but it actually reminded me of seeing the very first Superman for the first time and Gene Hackman shaving all his hair off to play Lex Luthor. That's what it reminded me of. It was so shocking to see, but I don't know. It may grow on me some more. It definitely it was the last thing I expected.
Yeah, well, a lot of different figures made this podcast, from Gene Hackman to AJ Hawk. We had Kyle Turley. We had Little Boy Summertime Haircuts. And, of course, we had Reggie Bush and Marques Colston. But that was fun going down memory lane. I'd say, Coach Payton, you keep the do the way it is. It looks pretty good. And I know I'm around your age, a little younger. If we're getting the gray hair, just keep it all off, Shanle, right? The bald looks good, right, Shanle?
The bald is beautiful. Obviously, I'm gonna promote that. But the one thing I'm thinking about as we're talking about Coach Payton cutting his hair is knowing Coach Payton. The story behind this haircut, it could be a motivational thing to the team. It could be forgetting the last 2 years, getting rid of the old, something, bringing out the new. It's something. I think there's something motivational behind it.
Maybe a lost bet.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, this is the kind of chemistry we have because next week I'm going to be in New Orleans at minicamp, and we're very hopeful to get a lot of great guests. And I'm going to be investigative reporter, and I'm going to get to the bottom of it, Scott. I'm going to find out what the hell is going on with Sean Payton's hair. Why the hell are you shaving your hair? One of these days we're going to have him on. Maybe he'll tell us if he hasn't told the media yet. But, well, listen, great job, guys. That was fun. I mean, we spent a lot of time in this part of the year talking memories, and you never know with this podcast. It kind of takes on a life of its own, but that was a fun one. Looking back at the careers of Reggie Bush and Marques Colston, of course, getting Scott Shanle's opinion on it. I'd like to thank Justin Thomas. I'd like to thank Shanle. We're on all the platforms, folks. iTunes, Podbean, Stitcher, Spotify, Google. Check us out. We're growing every week, and we'll be in New Orleans for minicamp next week. Like I said, trying to get a lot of current players to kind of blend in with all the alums that we've had in our first couple of months here on your Been There, Done That podcast. I'm Mike Nabors. We'll see you in New Orleans next week. Thanks for listening.